She was supposed to protect them, guide them, keep them safe. Instead, a special education teacher in Wisconsin crossed a line so disturbing, so calculated, that it would shatter an entire community's trust forever. Christina Formella, 29 years old, married, a professional educator trusted with the most vulnerable students in her school. But behind that professional smile, behind those lesson plans and parent-teacher conferences, this woman was living a double life that would make your stomach turn. Y'all, she wasn't just breaking the rules. She was preying on a teenage boy, her student, someone she was supposed to mentor, someone she was supposed to protect. And here's the thing that'll really mess you up. She didn't think she'd get caught. She truly believed she was smarter than everyone else, that she could hide in plain sight, that nobody would ever find out about the secret relationship happening right under their noses. She was wrong. This is the story of how a trusted educator became a predator, how text messages exposed a sick obsession, and how one community discovered that the person they trusted with their most vulnerable children was the last person who should have ever been near them. But before we dive into this disturbing case, I want to take just a moment to talk about something important. Look, we cover some seriously dark content on this channel, and I know a lot of you watching right now might be dealing with your own challenges, whether that's anxiety from hearing these stories, or maybe you're working through some personal stuff. That's why I'm grateful for today's sponsor. This is a space where we talk about real issues, real crimes, and real consequences. And having tools to protect yourself, whether that's your mental health or your online privacy, matters. All right, now let's get back to this case, because what Christina Formella did and how she got caught is something you ain't gonna believe. So here's where our story really begins. Not in a courtroom, not in a police interrogation room, but in what looked like a pretty normal life. Christina Marie Formella was born in 1989, growing up in southeastern Wisconsin. Middle-class family, normal childhood, the kind of upbringing that neighbors would describe as nice and unremarkable. But here's something you need to understand about predators, y'all. They don't come with warning labels. They don't have horns or wear signs that say dangerous person. Most of the time, they look just like everyone else. And Christina, she looked like the girl next door. According to those who knew her, Christina was always drawn to working with kids. She went to college in Wisconsin, majoring in special education. Now, let that sink in for a second. She specifically chose a career path that would put her in direct contact with the most vulnerable student population. Kids with learning disabilities, kids with developmental challenges, kids who needed extra support, extra patience, extra protection. Was that always part of some calculated plan, or did something change along the way? Look, I ain't saying every special ed teacher has bad intentions, obviously not. The vast majority are absolute heroes doing incredibly difficult and important work. But in Christina's case, the access this job gave her would become central to everything that followed. She graduated with her teaching degree around 2011, and by 2012, she'd landed a position at a school in the Brown Deer School District, just north of Milwaukee. To everyone around her, she seemed like a dedicated professional. She showed up on time. She did her paperwork. She smiled at faculty meetings. But here's what folks didn't know. In 2014, Christina got married. We're gonna call her husband John to protect his privacy because honestly, this man is as much a victim in this story as anyone. Picture this. You're a guy who thinks he's found his person. Your wife's a teacher, respectable career, right? She talks about her students, brings work home, seems dedicated to helping kids succeed. You think you know her. You have no idea. They bought a house together in the suburbs. They had what looked like a stable, normal marriage. Christina continued teaching. John worked his regular job, but behind closed doors, Christina was becoming increasingly dissatisfied. Multiple sources later described her as someone who craved attention, who needed validation, who felt like she was meant for something more than her regular life. Red flag alert, y'all. Now, here's where we need to talk about who Christina really was when nobody was looking. According to later court documents and statements from people who knew her, Christina had what psychologists would call narcissistic tendencies. Let me break that down in plain English. This gal thought she was special. She believed the normal rules didn't apply to her. She had this deep need to be admired, to be desired, to be the center of attention. On the surface, she played the role perfectly. The caring teacher, the dedicated professional, the put-together young woman, but she was performing all the time, and she was getting bored with the performance. By 2017, Christina had been teaching for several years. She was around 28 years old, still young, still attractive by conventional standards, but increasingly trapped in what she saw as a mundane life. Married to a regular guy, teaching job that paid the bills but wasn't glamorous, suburban existence that felt suffocating. She wanted excitement, she wanted to feel powerful, she wanted to feel desired. And that's when she set her sights on a student. Now listen, this is where the story gets dark, really dark. So if you've got young ones around, maybe have them leave the room for a bit. In the fall of 2017, a new student entered Christina's special education program. We're gonna call him Tyler to protect his identity. Tyler was 16 years old. He had learning challenges. He came from a difficult home situation. In other words, he was exactly the kind of kid who needed a trustworthy adult in his life. Instead, he got Christina Formella. At first, according to later testimony, it seemed innocent enough. Christina took what appeared to be a special interest in Tyler's education. She offered extra help. She told him he was smart, that he had potential, that she believed in him. Things a good teacher would say. But they weren't coming from a good teacher. This was grooming, y'all, classic predator behavior. Here's what grooming looks like, and pay attention because this is important. First, the predator identifies a vulnerable target. Check. Second, they fill a need, emotional support, attention, validation. Check. Third, they create a special relationship that isolates the victim. Check. Fourth, they gradually introduce inappropriate content or conversation. Check. And finally, they escalate to physical contact, often making the victim feel like they're complicit or even responsible. Check, check, and check. By late 2017, Christina had given Tyler her personal cell phone number. Now, in some schools, teachers do communicate with students via text for legitimate educational purposes. But this wasn't that. The messages started getting personal. She asked about his feelings, his home life, his relationships. Then she started sharing about her own life, her marriage problems, how she felt misunderstood, how mature he was compared to other students. If you're sitting there thinking this sounds like textbook inappropriate, you're absolutely right. The texts became more frequent. Good morning texts, good night texts, texts during school hours, texts late at night. And here's the thing that makes this even more calculated. Christina knew exactly what she was doing. Every teacher in America receives training on appropriate boundaries with students. It's literally part of the job. You learn about no personal phone number sharing, no social media connections with current students, no one-on-one meetings in private spaces, no personal disclosure, no physical contact beyond brief, appropriate gestures. Christina knew all of this. She'd sat through the trainings. She'd signed the ethics documents. She just didn't care. Now here's what makes this case particularly frustrating. Looking back, there were signs. Little things that didn't seem important at the time, but should have raised red flags. According to later interviews, some staff members noticed that Christina seemed to pay special attention to Tyler. She'd keep him after class more than other students. She'd seek him out in the hallways, but nobody said anything. Why? Because predators are good at hiding in plain sight. They have explanations ready. He needs extra help. I'm just being supportive. He's having trouble at home. All technically true, all technically within her job description, but all being used as cover for something sinister. Meanwhile, to the outside world, Christina's life looked completely normal. She posted on social media about teaching, about her marriage, about weekend activities. She was living two completely different lives, y'all, and she was convinced she could keep them separate forever. She was wrong. As 2017 turned into 2018, the relationship between Christina and Tyler was about to cross a line that couldn't be uncrossed. The texts were getting more explicit. The emotional manipulation was intensifying. And Christina Formella was about to do something that would destroy multiple lives. But what nobody knew, what nobody could have predicted, was just how brazen she was about to become. Little did anyone realize the crime had already started, the grooming was complete, and what came next would shock an entire community. All right, y'all, deep breath. This is where things get real ugly real fast. January 2018. Christina Formella is 29 years old, still married, still teaching, still presenting herself as this wholesome, caring educator. But according to court documents that would later be filed, this is when the relationship with Tyler, her 16-year-old student, became physical. Let me be crystal clear about something. This wasn't a relationship. This wasn't a love affair. This wasn't two people who couldn't help their feelings. This was a crime. This was a grown woman in a position of power and authority sexually abusing a child she was supposed to protect. In Wisconsin, the age of consent is 18. Even if it wasn't, Christina's position as Tyler's teacher made any sexual contact automatically illegal under Wisconsin's sexual assault by school staff statutes. There is no gray area here. None. But Christina had convinced herself and was trying to convince Tyler that what they had was special, different, that nobody would understand their connection. Classic predator language. According to the evidence that would later emerge, Christina began arranging ways to be alone with Tyler outside of the normal classroom setting. And y'all, the level of calculation here is disturbing. She'd offer to give him rides home, said she was on the way even when she wasn't. She'd text him to meet her in empty classrooms after school. She'd find excuses to keep him late when other students had left. The text messages between them tell a chilling story. Messages that start with, "I miss you already, can't stop thinking about you, when can I see you alone?" These are not messages a teacher sends to a student, ever. But Christina wasn't just sending inappropriate texts. According to later testimony and evidence, the physical relationship had begun. I'm not gonna go into graphic detail here because that's not what this channel is about. But what you need to understand is that multiple instances of sexual contact occurred between January and March of 2018, in her car, in empty classrooms, at times when she knew they wouldn't be caught, or so she thought. Now here's where we need to talk about the psychological warfare Christina was waging on this kid. See, she wasn't just committing a crime. She was making sure Tyler felt responsible, making sure he'd keep the secret. According to later statements, Christina told Tyler things like, "If anyone finds out, we'll both get in trouble. People won't understand what we have. You're so mature for your age. This is our special secret. I could lose everything if you tell anyone." You see what she's doing here? She's making a 16-year-old kid feel like he's equally responsible for the situation, like he has as much to lose as she does. This is manipulation 101, y'all. She's transferring guilt onto a child, making him feel like if he tells someone, he's the one who'll be hurting her. Classic abuser behavior. And let's be real for a second about the power dynamic here. Christina was an adult, his teacher in a position of authority, someone he was taught to trust and respect, someone who controlled his grades and academic future. Tyler was a minor, her student, someone with learning challenges from a difficult home situation, literally still a child. There was no equal relationship here. There couldn't be. As winter turned to early spring, Christina was getting bolder, more reckless. The text messages were coming at all hours, morning, noon, night, during school hours when she should have been teaching other students. According to phone records that would later be analyzed, on some days there were over 100 text messages between them. 100 messages. Let that sink in. Many of these messages were explicitly sexual in nature. Some included photographs. And remember, y'all, this is not just inappropriate. This is the production and distribution of child exploitation material, federal crimes, multiple felonies. But Christina had convinced herself she was untouchable. She'd gotten away with it for months. Nobody had caught on. Tyler wasn't telling anyone. She thought she was smarter than everyone around her. She wasn't. Here's what's wild about this case. There were multiple times when Christina almost got caught before the whole thing finally blew up. According to later testimony, another teacher had walked in on Christina and Tyler in an empty classroom once. They weren't doing anything obviously inappropriate at that moment, but the vibe was off. The other teacher asked if everything was okay. Christina, smooth as butter, said she was just giving Tyler some extra help with an assignment. The other teacher left. Another time, a student saw Tyler getting into Christina's car after school. Again, not inherently suspicious. Teachers sometimes give students rides in emergency situations. But this was becoming a pattern. And patterns are what eventually get people caught. Eventually. Meanwhile, back at home, Christina's husband was starting to notice changes. Now, according to later statements and divorce filings, John had no idea what was really going on. But he knew something was off. His wife was on her phone constantly. She was distant. She seemed distracted. When he tried to talk to her about it, she'd get defensive, accuse him of being paranoid, tell him he was smothering her. Classic cheater behavior. But John thought maybe she was having an affair with another teacher, or maybe an online thing. He never in a million years thought she was sexually abusing one of her students. Why would he? That's not something you want to believe about the person you're married to. There were arguments. Christina would storm out of the house saying she needed space. She'd be gone for hours. Where was she going? Yeah, you can probably guess. March 2018. This is when the walls start closing in, though Christina doesn't realize it yet. See, Tyler was 16, but he wasn't stupid. And as time went on, he was starting to realize that what was happening wasn't right. According to later testimony, he began to feel confused, guilty, scared. Christina had told him this was special, that they cared about each other, but it was starting to feel less like care and more like something else entirely. Something darker. Tyler started acting differently at school. Other students noticed. He was withdrawn, anxious. His grades were dropping even further. A school counselor pulled him aside one day to check in, asked if everything was okay at home. Tyler said everything was fine, but it wasn't fine, not even close. Now here's where things take a turn that Christina never saw coming. In mid-March 2018, Tyler made a new friend at school. Another student, we'll call him Marcus, who Tyler felt like he could trust. One day after school, Tyler and Marcus were hanging out, and Tyler's phone kept buzzing. Message after message after message. Marcus, being a nosy teenager, asked who was blowing up his phone. And y'all, Tyler showed him. He showed him the messages. Marcus couldn't believe what he was seeing. Messages from Miss Formella, their teacher, that were clearly, obviously, unmistakably inappropriate. Explicit messages. Sexual messages. Messages no adult should ever send to a teenager. Marcus immediately told Tyler this wasn't okay, that he needed to tell someone, that Miss Formella could get in serious trouble, and that Tyler wasn't at fault. But Tyler was terrified. Remember, Christina had spent months conditioning him to believe that telling anyone would ruin both of their lives. So Marcus made a decision. He told his own parents. March 22, 2018, 7:43 p.m. Marcus's parents, after hearing what their son had seen, immediately contacted the Brown Deer Police Department. This is the moment everything changes. The moment Christina's carefully constructed double life starts to collapse. The police took the report seriously. Allegations of a teacher having a sexual relationship with a student. That's all hands on deck. Within hours, detectives were assigned to the case. They contacted the school district administration. They began the process of obtaining search warrants for phone records. And Christina Formella had no idea that her world was about to implode. March 23, 2018, a Friday morning. Christina arrives at school like any other day. Hair done, makeup on, ready to play the role of dedicated teacher. She probably texted Tyler that morning, probably told him to have a good day, maybe said she couldn't wait to see him later. She had no clue that at that exact moment, police and school administrators were preparing to confront her. Around 9:30 a.m., Christina was called to the principal's office over the intercom. "Miss Formella, please report to the main office." According to later statements, she didn't think anything of it at first, probably figured it was about paperwork or a parent concern. She walked down that hallway with complete confidence. She would not be walking back. When Christina entered the office, she was met by the principal, the district's HR director, and two police detectives. Now, I would have loved to see her face at that moment. The exact second when she realized something was seriously wrong. The principal told her there had been allegations of inappropriate contact with a student. Christina's face went pale. The detectives asked if she'd be willing to answer some questions. And here's where Christina made her first major mistake in handling the situation. She said yes. Christina was taken to the Brown Deer Police Department for questioning. She wasn't under arrest at this point. Technically, she was free to leave at any time. But she didn't leave. Because in her mind, she could still talk her way out of this. She genuinely believed she could lie her way to freedom. The interrogation lasted approximately 3 hours. The detectives, trained in getting the truth from people who don't want to give it, started with easy questions. How long have you been teaching? Tell us about your students. Do you have a good relationship with your class? Christina answered confidently. Said she loved teaching, that she cared deeply about her students' success. Then the detectives showed her Tyler's name. Tell us about Tyler. Christina's demeanor shifted, just slightly. The detectives caught it immediately. She said Tyler was a good kid, struggled academically but was trying hard. She'd been giving him extra help. The detectives nodded, wrote some notes. Then they dropped the hammer. We have his phone records, Christina. We know about the text messages. Y'all, what happened next is textbook narcissist behavior. Christina didn't break down and confess. She didn't lawyer up and stop talking. She doubled down on the lies. She tried to explain it away. Oh, the text messages, those were just me being supportive. He was going through a hard time at home. I might have been too friendly, but it was all innocent. I never meant for anything to seem inappropriate. The detectives let her talk. Let her dig herself deeper and deeper. See, here's the thing about police interrogations. Good detectives don't show all their cards at once. They let the suspect lie, get those lies on record, and then systematically dismantle them with evidence. And that's exactly what was happening. The detectives started showing Christina specific messages, messages that couldn't be explained away as just being supportive. Messages like, "I can't stop thinking about last night. When can I see you alone again? You make me feel things I shouldn't feel." Christina's face went from confident to panicked in seconds. She tried to claim her phone had been hacked, that maybe someone else sent those messages, that it looked worse than it was. The detectives weren't buying what she was selling, not even a little bit. After about 2 hours of dancing around the truth, Christina finally admitted to some physical contact with Tyler. But even then, even when she was caught red-handed, she tried to minimize it. According to the interrogation transcript, she said things like, "It only happened once or twice. I don't know what I was thinking. He came on to me." Yeah, she actually tried to blame the 16-year-old. "I was going through a hard time in my marriage." None of these are excuses. None of them matter. A grown woman doesn't get a pass because her marriage was struggling. A teacher doesn't get a pass because her student showed her attention. There is no excuse for what she did. The detectives continued pressing. They wanted details, dates, locations, frequency. Christina was crying now. But these weren't tears of genuine remorse. These were tears of someone who just realized her life as she knew it was over. At approximately 2:15 p.m. on March 23, 2018, Christina Formella was placed under arrest. The charges: sexual assault of a student by school staff, second-degree sexual assault of a minor, exposing a child to harmful material, multiple counts related to the explicit images exchanged. She was handcuffed, read her rights, and taken to the Milwaukee County Jail. Her mugshot tells you everything you need to know. There's no tears, no visible emotion. She just looks cold, empty. Word spread fast, like wildfire fast. By that evening, parents were getting emails from the school district. A teacher had been arrested. An investigation was ongoing. Counselors would be available for students who needed support. The local news picked up the story almost immediately. Brown Deer teacher arrested for sexual assault of student. Special ed teacher accused of inappropriate relationship with teen. Wisconsin educator faces multiple charges in sex abuse case. The community was in shock. Absolute shock. Parents who had trusted Christina with their most vulnerable kids were horrified. Fellow teachers felt betrayed. Students were confused and scared. The trust was shattered. And on social media, y'all, it was a firestorm. Some people, and this is gonna make you sick, some people actually tried to defend her. He probably wanted it. Boys that age know what they're doing. She's young and attractive, he must have been thrilled. Let me be absolutely clear. These takes are disgusting and wrong. If this was a male teacher and a female student, nobody would be saying these things. Nobody. This is sexual abuse. Period. Gender doesn't matter. The law doesn't care if the predator is pretty. The law doesn't care if the victim is male. A child cannot consent to sexual activity with an adult in a position of authority. That's why these laws exist. Back at Christina's house, her husband was dealing with his own nightmare. According to later court documents, John had no idea any of this was happening. He learned about his wife's arrest from the news like everyone else. Imagine that. Imagine finding out your spouse is a predator from a news broadcast. Within weeks, John filed for divorce. Can't say I blame him. While Christina sat in jail, detectives continued building their case. They executed search warrants for Christina's cell phone, her personal computer, her classroom computer, her vehicle, her home. And y'all, what they found was damning. Hundreds of explicit text messages, photographs that should never exist, detailed conversations about their sexual encounters, evidence of multiple meetings at various locations. Christina had documented her own crimes. She literally created the evidence trail that would convict her. See, this is what happens when predators think they're smarter than everyone else. They get sloppy. They get comfortable. They don't think they'll ever get caught. And then they do. Tyler was also interviewed extensively by detectives trained in speaking with victims of sexual abuse. According to those interviews, Tyler confirmed the relationship had been going on since January. He detailed multiple encounters. He provided information that corroborated the digital evidence. But here's the heartbreaking part. Tyler still felt guilty. He still felt like maybe he'd done something wrong. Like maybe he was at fault. That's what abuse does, y'all. It makes victims question their own reality. Tyler was not at fault, not even a little bit. In the weeks following Christina's arrest, the Brown Deer School District held emergency meetings with parents. People wanted answers. How did this happen? Were there warning signs that were missed? What policies failed? The school district defended their hiring practices, background checks, and training programs. But the reality is, sometimes predators pass all the checks. They have clean records. They interview well. They know how to present themselves. That's what makes them dangerous. The district did implement new policies after this case. Enhanced monitoring of teacher-student communications, mandatory reporting for any suspicion of inappropriate relationships, additional training on recognizing grooming behavior, stricter rules about one-on-one interactions. Better late than never, I suppose. But it didn't help Tyler. As Christina sat in jail awaiting trial, The prosecution was building a case so airtight that even her defense attorneys knew they had an uphill battle. The text messages, the photographs, Tyler's testimony, Christina's own partial confession during the interrogation. She was going to trial, and the whole world was watching. All right, so Christina's behind bars, the initial shock has worn off, and now it's time for investigators to build a case that'll stick. And let me tell you, what they found was way worse than anyone initially realized. The Milwaukee County District Attorney's Office assigned a team of prosecutors specifically experienced in crimes against children. This wasn't gonna be some rush job. They wanted every single piece of evidence documented, verified, and bulletproof. First up, Christina's phone. Now, when detectives first got the search warrant for her phone, Christina had already tried to delete a bunch of messages. Classic move, right? Except here's the thing, deleting doesn't mean gone. Not even close. Digital forensics experts were able to recover thousands of deleted messages between Christina and Tyler. Messages she thought she'd erased forever were sitting right there in the phone's metadata. And y'all, the content of these messages painted a picture of a relationship that had been going on even longer than initially thought. Remember how Christina claimed in her interrogation that physical contact only happened once or twice. The messages told a very different story. References to multiple encounters, detailed discussions about where and when they'd meet next, explicit content that left zero doubt about the nature of the relationship. She'd been lying through her teeth. Now, I'm not gonna describe the explicit images in detail because this is a family-friendly channel. Well, as family-friendly as a true crime channel can be. But what you need to understand is that among the recovered data, investigators found photographs that Christina had sent to Tyler and photographs she'd solicited from him. Under federal law, this constitutes the production and distribution of child sexual abuse material. Each image is a separate felony. Each time an image was transmitted, that's another charge. The charges were stacking up, fast. By the time forensics was done with just the phone evidence, the prosecution was looking at 12 counts of sexual assault of a student by school staff, 8 counts of exposing a child to harmful material, multiple federal charges related to child exploitation images, additional charges related to use of a computer to facilitate a child sex crime. We're talking about potential decades in prison at this point. Decades. But wait, it gets worse. Because Christina wasn't just using her personal phone. The search warrant also covered her home computer and her school-issued laptop. This woman was conducting this inappropriate relationship on a computer provided by the school district. Let that sink in. The school's IT department kept logs of all activity on district devices. They could see when Christina logged in, what websites she visited, what applications she used when she accessed student records. And here's where we see just how calculated this whole thing was. Christina had been accessing Tyler's personal file repeatedly, more than any other student. She'd pulled his home address, his family information, his schedule. She'd been planning this. This wasn't some spontaneous mistake or moment of weakness. This was premeditated. This was grooming with forethought. On her personal computer at home, investigators found saved copies of messages with Tyler, photographs stored in hidden folders, search history that included age of consent in Wisconsin and teacher-student relationship laws. She knew it was illegal, y'all. She looked it up. She knew the consequences and did it anyway. That's not a mistake. That's a choice. Christina's car was also seized as part of the investigation. Now you might be wondering, what could they possibly find in a car? Oh, honey. So much. Forensic teams found Tyler's fingerprints throughout the vehicle, especially in the passenger seat, DNA evidence that confirmed he'd been in the car multiple times, a receipt from a motel dated February 14, 2018, Valentine's Day, when Christina had called in sick to school. She told the school she had the flu. She was at a motel with her 16-year-old student. The GPS data from her car told investigators everywhere she'd driven in the previous 6 months, multiple trips to secluded areas, trips to parking lots near Tyler's neighborhood, routes that made no sense unless she was specifically going to see him. The evidence was everywhere. While all this forensic work was happening, detectives were also conducting extensive interviews with anyone who might have information. They spoke with other teachers at the school, students in Christina's classes, Tyler's family members, Christina's soon-to-be ex-husband, friends of both Christina and Tyler, school administrators. And the picture that emerged was fascinating in the worst way possible. Multiple students reported that they'd noticed Christina paying special attention to Tyler. One student said Christina's eyes would light up when Tyler entered the room. Another teacher reported that she'd seen Christina and Tyler having what seemed like an intense conversation in the hallway once, standing way too close together. At the time, she'd brushed it off. Now it made sickening sense. Tyler's mom was interviewed extensively. According to her statement, Tyler had been acting strangely for months, more withdrawn, secretive with his phone, mood swings. She'd asked him multiple times if something was wrong. He always said he was fine. She had no idea her son was being victimized by someone she trusted to educate him. The guilt she must have felt, I can't even imagine. But it wasn't her fault. It was Christina's. John, Christina's husband, gave a statement to police that was absolutely gut-wrenching. According to his testimony, he'd noticed Christina was distant starting in late 2017. She was on her phone constantly. She'd stay late at school more often. She seemed distracted during conversations. When he asked her about it, she'd snap at him, tell him he was being paranoid, accuse him of not trusting her. Classic cheater gaslighting. John said that in January 2018, Christina had suggested they take a break from their marriage. Said she needed space to figure things out. Y'all, that's when the physical relationship with Tyler was starting. She was creating distance from her husband so she'd have more freedom to abuse her student. Calculated, intentional, evil. John also told investigators about Christina's personality, how she needed constant validation, how she'd get upset if she wasn't the center of attention, how she had this need to be seen as special and different from other people. This aligns with what psychologists call narcissistic personality traits: grandiose sense of self-importance, need for excessive admiration, lack of empathy. But here's what John said that really stuck with me. I thought I knew her. I thought I married someone kind and caring. I realized I never knew her at all. Remember Marcus, Tyler's friend who saw the messages and told his parents. Detectives interviewed him extensively because he was the domino that started this whole thing falling apart. According to Marcus's statement, Tyler had seemed really off for weeks before he finally saw the messages. Anxious, jumpy, always checking his phone. Marcus said when he saw Miss Formella's name on the incoming texts, he thought maybe it was about schoolwork at first. Then he read one, then another. Then his stomach dropped. Marcus described feeling sick, confused, angry. He told Tyler immediately that this wasn't right. That Miss Formella was the adult and should know better. That Tyler needed to tell someone. Tyler begged him not to say anything, but Marcus knew he had to. He told his parents that same night, and they called the police within the hour. Marcus is a hero in this story. A kid who saw something wrong and spoke up even when it was uncomfortable. That's not easy at 16 years old. That takes serious courage. Tyler was interviewed by specially trained forensic interviewers at a child advocacy center. These interviews are conducted by professionals who know how to talk to victims of abuse without re-traumatizing them. The interviews are recorded and can be used as evidence in court. Tyler's interview lasted several hours over multiple sessions. According to the statements released by the prosecution, Tyler provided detailed testimony about how the relationship began, the grooming process Christina used, specific instances of sexual contact, locations where encounters occurred, the psychological manipulation he experienced. And throughout it all, Tyler kept saying he felt like it was his fault, like he'd done something to encourage it. "This breaks my heart, y'all. This is what predators do. They make their victims feel responsible." The interviewers had to repeatedly remind Tyler that he was a child, that Christina was the adult, that she was in a position of power, and that nothing about this situation was his fault. Tyler's testimony would become one of the most powerful pieces of evidence at trial. Using all the evidence, phone records, GPS data, witness statements, Tyler's testimony, prosecutors reconstructed a detailed timeline of the relationship. The timeline showed December 2017, initial grooming begins, inappropriate text messages start. January 3, 2018, first physical sexual contact. January-February 2018, multiple encounters, increasing frequency. February 14, 2018, motel meeting while Christina called in sick. March 2018, relationship continues, Christina becomes more reckless. March 22, 2018, Marcus tells his parents. March 23, 2018, Christina is arrested. When you see it laid out like that, the pattern is undeniable. This wasn't one mistake. This wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment. This was months of systematic abuse. Investigators also combed through Christina's social media accounts. And here's where you see the absolute disconnect between her public persona and her private reality. On Facebook, Christina was posting inspirational quotes about teaching, photos from her classroom with captions about loving her job, selfies with her husband with captions like "number blessed" and "number married life," posts about self-care and positivity. Meanwhile, she was sexually abusing a 16-year-old. The week before her arrest, she posted a photo of herself at school with the caption, "So grateful to make a difference in these kids' lives." The audacity. The absolute audacity. She was making a difference, all right, a traumatic, criminal difference. What's wild is looking at the comments from before people knew. "You're such an amazing teacher. Those kids are so lucky to have you. You have such a kind heart." If they only knew. While prosecutors were building their case, Christina's defense team was trying to figure out how to handle this train wreck. She'd been assigned a public defender initially. Her teaching salary and impending divorce meant she couldn't afford a private attorney. The defense had a nearly impossible job. The evidence was overwhelming. Their client had partially confessed. The victim was willing to testify. What could they possibly argue? Well, they tried a few approaches. First, they attempted to get some evidence suppressed. They argued that the initial search of Christina's phone was too broad. The judge shut that down fast. Next, they tried to argue that Christina was going through mental health issues that impaired her judgment. The prosecution brought in expert witnesses who testified that mental health struggles don't cause someone to prey on children. That's not how it works. The defense also floated the idea of arguing that Tyler pursued Christina, not the other way around. And this is where I need to be really clear. It doesn't matter if Tyler showed interest. It doesn't matter if he had a crush on his teacher. It doesn't matter if he was a willing participant. He was a child. She was the adult. End of story. The law is explicit. A student cannot consent to a sexual relationship with their teacher. The power dynamic makes true consent impossible. As the trial date approached, the prosecution offered Christina a plea deal. Now this is standard procedure. The prosecution had a rock-solid case, but trials are expensive and time-consuming. Plus, accepting a plea would spare Tyler from having to testify in open court. The initial plea offer was, plead guilty to 3 counts of sexual assault of a student by school staff. Recommended sentence of 15 years in prison. Lifetime sex offender registration. No contact with the victim ever again. Most people in Christina's position would have jumped at this deal. Going to trial meant risking way more time. Meant having every detail of the relationship aired in public. Meant Tyler would have to testify. But Christina said no. She wanted to fight it. Even with mountains of evidence against her, even with her own partial confession, even with multiple witnesses, she still thought she could win. Her attorneys tried to convince her otherwise. They laid out the reality. The evidence was damning, the jury wouldn't be sympathetic, and she could be looking at 30-plus years if convicted on all counts. But narcissists don't see reality the way the rest of us do. Christina genuinely believed she could get up on that stand, tell her version of events, and somehow convince 12 people that she was the victim here. She couldn't have been more wrong. As details of the case leaked to the media, public reaction became increasingly intense. Local news was covering every development. Nancy Grace did a segment on it. Reddit threads were analyzing every detail. The general public was divided, though thankfully, the vast majority recognized this for what it was: child abuse. But there was a disturbing minority who tried to downplay it. He's basically an adult. When I was 16, I would have loved this. She's hot, he's lucky. Let me address this garbage directly. A 16-year-old is not an adult. The brain isn't fully developed. The ability to understand long-term consequences isn't there. This is why we have age of consent laws. And the idea that Tyler was lucky, that's disgusting. That's rape culture. That's the kind of thinking that lets female predators get lighter sentences than male predators for the same crimes. If we're serious about protecting children, then we need to protect all children equally. Back in Brown Deer, the community was trying to heal. The school brought in additional counselors. They held meetings for parents. They implemented new training for staff. But the damage was done. Studies show that when a trusted authority figure betrays that trust, especially in cases of sexual abuse, the effects ripple through entire communities. Students who had Christina as a teacher felt violated, even if they weren't directly abused. Parents questioned their judgment. Other teachers felt the sting of public suspicion. One person's crimes affected hundreds of people. Tyler, of course, was struggling the most. According to later victim impact statements, he was in therapy multiple times a week. He'd switched schools to get away from the constant reminders. He was dealing with anxiety, depression, and PTSD symptoms. His childhood was stolen. His ability to trust adults was shattered, all because his teacher decided her wants were more important than his well-being. After Christina rejected the plea deal, the trial was officially scheduled. The state of Wisconsin v. Christina Formella would begin jury selection in September 2018, approximately 6 months after her arrest. The prosecution felt confident. The defense was scrambling. And Christina, she was sitting in jail on a $100,000 bail that nobody was willing to post. Her husband had divorced her. Her family had distanced themselves. Her former friends wanted nothing to do with her. She'd lost everything already. But the real reckoning was about to begin. The trial would expose every detail of what Christina had done, every text message, every encounter, every manipulation. And the whole nation would be watching as a predator finally faced justice. But before we get to the trial, real quick, if you're finding this deep dive valuable, do me a favor and hit that like button. It helps the algorithm show this content to more people. And if you haven't subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? We cover cases like this every single week. All right, let's get into the courtroom drama. September 17th, 2018. The trial of Christina Formella begins with jury selection. And let me tell you, finding impartial jurors for a case like this, not easy. The case had been all over the local news for months. Most people in Milwaukee County had at least heard of it. The judge and attorneys had to find 12 people who could set aside their initial reactions and judge the case purely on the evidence presented in court. Easier said than done. The prosecution wanted jurors who would take the case seriously, who wouldn't minimize sexual abuse of boys, who understood power dynamics. The defense wanted jurors who might be sympathetic to Christina's claims of mental health struggles, who might question Tyler's credibility. After 3 days of voir dire, that's the fancy legal term for jury selection, They settled on 12 jurors and 2 alternates. The mix was pretty diverse: 7 women, 5 men, ages ranging from mid-20s to retirement age, various professional backgrounds. These 12 people would decide Christina's fate. September 20th, 2018. Opening statements. The lead prosecutor was a woman named Jennifer Matthews, 15 years of experience, specializing in sex crimes against children. She stood up, made eye contact with each juror, and began. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this is a case about betrayal, about a woman who took an oath to protect the most vulnerable students in her care and instead preyed upon them. Christina Formella wasn't just Tyler's teacher. She was his special education teacher, someone specifically trained to work with kids who need extra support, extra patience, extra protection. But instead of protecting Tyler, she groomed him. She manipulated him. She sexually abused him. And she did it repeatedly, methodically, and without remorse." The prosecutor laid out exactly what the evidence would show. Over 2,000 text messages between Christina and Tyler, explicit photographs, GPS data showing Christina's car at various locations where encounters occurred, motel receipts, Tyler's testimony, Christina's own partial confession to police. The evidence would be overwhelming. The prosecutor told the jury that they wouldn't need to take anyone's word for it. The evidence would speak for itself. Then she addressed something that she knew the defense would try to exploit. The defense may try to suggest that Tyler somehow pursued this relationship, that he was a willing participant, that at 16 he knew what he was doing. Don't be fooled. The law is clear. A child cannot consent to a sexual relationship with their teacher. The power imbalance makes real consent impossible. Christina Formella was the adult. She was the professional. She was the one with all the power, and she abused that power in the worst way imaginable. She sat down. The courtroom was silent. You could hear a pin drop. The defense attorney, a guy named Robert Keller, stood up next, and honestly, you could tell he knew he was fighting an uphill battle. "Ladies and gentlemen, nobody is denying that Christina Formella made mistakes, serious mistakes. But this case isn't as black and white as the prosecution wants you to believe. Christina was going through a difficult time. Her marriage was falling apart. She was dealing with mental health struggles. She made incredibly poor choices, yes, but the relationship that developed wasn't something she planned or orchestrated. It evolved from genuine care and concern into something inappropriate. We're asking you to consider the full context, to see Christina as a flawed human being who made terrible decisions, not as the monster the prosecution is painting her to be." He tried to argue that some of the text messages were taken out of context, that Christina's confession to police was coerced. But here's the thing, none of that actually mattered. The facts were the facts. The defense wasn't denying the relationship happened. They were just trying to minimize it, make it seem like a tragic mistake rather than predatory behavior. The jury didn't look convinced. Over the next week and a half, the prosecution methodically presented their evidence. They called witnesses. The school principal testified about Christina's hiring, her job responsibilities, and the training she'd received about appropriate boundaries with students. Under cross-examination, the defense tried to suggest the school didn't provide adequate supervision. The principal shut that down fast. Christina knew the rules. She chose to break them. Remember Marcus, the friend who saw the text messages and reported it. He testified about what he saw, how disturbed he was, and how Tyler seemed scared to tell anyone. His testimony was powerful. The defense tried to suggest Marcus misunderstood what he'd seen. Marcus didn't budge. He knew what he read. It was inappropriate, period. A digital forensics expert walked the jury through the recovered text messages, explaining how deleted messages were retrieved and how they verified the messages were authentic. The defense tried to create doubt about whether Christina had actually sent all the messages. The expert showed that the messages came from Christina's phone, sent during times when she had the phone, from locations where her GPS placed her. There was no doubt. The detective who conducted Christina's initial interrogation testified about her statements, her demeanor, and her partial confession. The defense tried to argue the interrogation was coercive. The detective calmly explained that Christina was read her rights, was free to leave at any time, was offered water and bathroom breaks, and voluntarily chose to speak to them, and that she admitted to sexual contact with Tyler. Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for and dreading. The prosecution presented the text messages, not all 2,000 of them, that would take days, but a carefully selected compilation showing the progression of the relationship. The messages were projected on a large screen for the jury to read. Early messages that seemed innocent. "Great job in class today. Let me know if you need any extra help." Then they got more personal. "I really enjoy our talks. You're so much more mature than the other students." Then inappropriate. "I can't stop thinking about you. When can I see you alone?" And finally, explicitly sexual messages that left zero doubt about what was happening. The jury's faces told the story. Some looked disgusted, some looked sad, one woman was crying. Christina sat at the defense table with basically no expression on her face. No tears, no remorse, nothing. The defense objected multiple times, claiming the messages were too prejudicial. The judge overruled every objection. This was the evidence. This was what Christina had done. If the truth was prejudicial, that wasn't the prosecution's problem. Day 8 of the trial. The moment everyone knew was coming. Tyler was called to testify. He walked to the witness stand looking terrified. He was 17 now, still just a kid. The prosecution handled him gently. They knew this was traumatic. "Tyler, can you tell us how you first met Miss Formella? When did your relationship with her change from teacher-student to something else? Did you feel like you could say no to her?" Tyler's answers were quiet but clear. He described how Christina made him feel special, how she told him he was different from other students, how she started texting him all the time. He talked about feeling confused and scared, but also feeling like he couldn't tell anyone because Miss Formella said they'd both get in trouble. He was a kid who'd been manipulated by an adult he trusted. Then came the defense's cross-examination. And y'all, this is where things got ugly. The defense attorney tried to suggest Tyler had pursued Christina. "Isn't it true you had a crush on Miss Formella? Didn't you initiate some of the text conversations? You were aware that what you were doing was wrong, weren't you?" The prosecution objected multiple times. The judge sustained most of the objections, but the damage was done. The defense was trying to blame a teenager for being abused. Tyler got emotional on the stand, started crying, and that's when something important happened. Several jurors looked pissed, not at Tyler, at the defense attorney for how he was treating a clearly traumatized kid. That cross-examination backfired hard. The prosecution called a psychologist who specialized in child sexual abuse. Dr. Sarah Chen testified about grooming behaviors, power dynamics in teacher-student relationships, and the long-term effects of sexual abuse. She explained that victims often feel responsible for the abuse, which is exactly what Christina had conditioned Tyler to feel. She talked about how predators isolate their victims, create a sense of special relationship, and use manipulation to maintain control. Everything about Miss Formella's behavior fits the classic pattern of grooming and predatory behavior. This was not a spontaneous mistake. This was calculated manipulation of a vulnerable minor. Calculated manipulation. The defense tried to counter with their own psychological expert who testified that Christina was suffering from depression and anxiety that impaired her judgment. The prosecution destroyed that argument. On cross-examination, they got the defense's expert to admit that mental health struggles don't cause people to prey on children. That's not how mental illness works. Score 1 for the prosecution. After the prosecution rested their case, it was the defense's turn. And honestly, they didn't have much. They called a few character witnesses, Christina's mother, a former college friend, who testified that Christina was generally a good person who'd made mistakes. The prosecution's cross-examination was brutal. Were you aware your daughter was sending explicit messages to a 16-year-old? Did you know she was meeting her student at motels? Would you call that being a good person? The defense also tried to enter evidence of Christina's therapy records, showing she'd been treated for anxiety. The judge allowed it, but it didn't help their case much. Having anxiety doesn't excuse sexual abuse. And then came the moment of truth. Would Christina take the stand in her own defense? After a long sidebar conversation with her attorneys, Christina decided not to testify. Now, legally speaking, the jury isn't allowed to hold that against her. The defense has no obligation to present evidence, and defendants have the right not to incriminate themselves. But let's be real. The jury wanted to hear from her. They wanted to hear her explanation, her remorse, something, and she said nothing. That silence spoke volumes. The prosecution's closing argument was devastating. Ladies and gentlemen, over the past 2 weeks you've heard the evidence. You've seen the text messages. You've heard Tyler's testimony. You've heard from experts. The facts are not in dispute. Christina Formella sexually abused a 16-year-old boy who was her student, someone she was supposed to protect. She groomed him. She manipulated him. She made him feel responsible for her crimes. And when she got caught, she lied, she minimized. She blamed everyone but herself. She has shown no genuine remorse, no understanding of the harm she's caused. Tyler will carry the trauma of what she did for the rest of his life. His ability to trust has been shattered. His childhood was stolen. All because Christina Formella decided her desires were more important than a child's well-being. The law is clear. The evidence is overwhelming. And justice demands that you find her guilty on all counts. She sat down. The courtroom was silent except for a few people crying. The defense's closing was, well, it was something. The attorney tried to argue that Christina had suffered enough, that she'd lost her career, her marriage, her reputation. As if that was punishment enough for sexually abusing a child. He asked the jury to show mercy, to consider that Christina hadn't physically hurt Tyler, as if psychological trauma doesn't count. He suggested that perhaps some of the charges were overblown, that maybe she was guilty of poor judgment but not of being a predator. The jury didn't look convinced at all. The prosecution had done their job. The jury was sent to deliberate on October 3, 2018 at 2:45 p.m. Everyone expected it might take days. There were multiple charges to consider, lots of evidence to review, but at 11:20 a.m. the next morning, less than 24 hours of deliberation, the jury sent word they'd reached a verdict. That was fast. And when juries come back that quickly in a case like this, it usually means the evidence was so overwhelming that there wasn't much to discuss. Christina was brought back to the courtroom from the holding cell. Tyler and his family were there. Reporters filled the gallery. Christina's mother sat alone in the back row. The judge entered. Everyone stood. And then came the words everyone had been waiting to hear. We have a verdict. October 4, 2018, 11:27 a.m. The courtroom is packed, silent. You can feel the tension in the air. The jury foreperson, a middle-aged man who'd been taking notes throughout the trial, stood with the verdict form in his hands. The judge asked, has the jury reached a verdict? We have, Your Honor. On the charge of sexual assault of a student by school staff, how do you find the defendant? Guilty. Christina barely reacted. A slight tightening around her eyes, that's it, but the judge wasn't done reading. Count 2, sexual assault of a child, guilty. Count 3, sexual exploitation of a child, guilty. Count 4, use of a computer to facilitate a child sex crime, guilty. On and on it went, 12 counts total, guilty, guilty, guilty. When the last verdict was read, Tyler broke down crying in his mother's arms. Not tears of joy, Tyler wasn't celebrating. He was releasing years of pain, confusion, and trauma. This was validation. Official recognition that what happened to him was wrong, that it wasn't his fault. That mattered more than you can imagine. Christina was immediately taken into custody. No bail pending sentencing. As the bailiffs handcuffed her, she finally showed emotion. She started crying. Not like Tyler, these were tears of self-pity. She'd been convicted. She was going to prison. Her life as she knew it was over. Good. November 16, 2018. Christina was brought back to court for sentencing. In Wisconsin, the sentencing process allows for victim impact statements, opportunities for victims and their families to speak directly to the court about how the crime affected them. And y'all, these statements were absolutely gut-wrenching. Tyler's mother spoke first. Her voice was shaking but determined. "Your Honor, I trusted Christina Formella with my son. I sent him to school every day believing he was safe, believing the adults there would protect him. Instead, she preyed on him. She took advantage of his vulnerabilities. She manipulated him into believing what was happening was normal. My son has struggled every single day since this came to light. He has nightmares. He has panic attacks. He doesn't trust adults anymore. He had to switch schools because he couldn't walk those hallways without being triggered. He's in therapy 3 times a week. Christina Formella didn't just commit a crime. She stole my son's childhood. She shattered his ability to trust. She damaged him in ways that will take years to heal, if they ever fully heal. And for what? Her own selfish desires. I hope she gets the maximum sentence possible. Not out of vengeance, but because she has shown no real remorse. She has not taken accountability for the full extent of the harm she's caused. Society needs to be protected from people like her. There wasn't a dry eye in the courtroom. Then Tyler himself spoke, and this took incredible courage. "I'm not good at public speaking, and this is really hard for me to talk about. When this first started, I thought Miss Formella cared about me. I thought I was special to her in a good way. But then it kept going and I started to feel trapped. Like I couldn't tell anyone because we'd both get in trouble. She told me that a lot, that if anyone found out it would be bad for both of us. I felt like it was my fault, like I had done something to make this happen. It took a long time for my therapist and my mom and the police to convince me that it wasn't my fault, that I was just a kid and she was the adult. I still have bad days, days where I feel anxious or depressed, days where I don't want to leave my room. I don't know if I'll ever fully get over what happened. I hope that by speaking up, maybe I can help other kids who are going through something like this. Let them know it's not their fault, that they should tell someone, and I hope Miss Formella gets help. But I also hope she goes to prison for a long time, because what she did was wrong, really wrong." Half the courtroom was sobbing, including some of the court staff. Tyler sat down next to his mom and she wrapped her arms around him. "That kid is braver than most adults." A few other people spoke too. Marcus's mother gave a statement about how her son had been traumatized by discovering the abuse and feeling helpless to stop it. A therapist who specialized in child sexual abuse gave a statement about the long-term psychological effects Tyler would likely face. Then it was the defense's turn. Christina's mother got up and pleaded for leniency. She talked about how Christina had been a good kid growing up, how she'd always wanted to be a teacher, how she'd made a terrible mistake but didn't deserve to have her whole life ruined. It was a mother's instinct to defend her child. I get that, but Christina wasn't a child. She was a 29-year-old adult who systematically abused a minor. There's a difference. Finally, Christina herself was given the opportunity to speak. She read from a prepared statement. Her voice was flat, emotionless. "Your Honor, I want to apologize for my actions. I made very poor choices that hurt people I care about. I was going through a difficult time personally, and I made decisions that I deeply regret. I hope that one day Tyler and his family can forgive me. I never intended to cause harm. I've learned a lot from this experience, and I hope to use my time in prison to better myself and eventually become a productive member of society again." That was it. No real remorse. No acknowledgement of the full extent of what she'd done. Just a bunch of hollow words designed to minimize and deflect. The judge saw right through it. Judge Patricia Hamilton had heard enough. She began by addressing Christina directly. "Miss Formella, You stood in a position of trust. You were entrusted with the care and education of vulnerable children. You violated that trust in the most egregious way possible. You groomed a 16-year-old boy. You manipulated him. You sexually abused him. And you did so repeatedly and with full knowledge that what you were doing was illegal and harmful. Your expression of remorse today rings hollow. Throughout this process, you have minimized your conduct, blamed others, and shown more concern for your own well-being than for the victim you harmed. The court must consider both punishment and public safety. You have shown yourself to be a danger to children. Society must be protected. Therefore, on count 1, I sentence you to 15 years in state prison. On counts 2 through 12, I sentence you to concurrent terms ranging from 5 to 10 years. Your total sentence is 15 years in the Wisconsin state prison system, followed by 10 years of supervised release. You will be required to register as a sex offender for life. You are prohibited from having any contact with the victim or his family. You are prohibited from working with children in any capacity, ever again. This court hopes that you will use your time in prison to truly reflect on the harm you've caused and to become a better person. But make no mistake, this sentence reflects the seriousness of your crimes and society's commitment to protecting children from predators. Christina was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs. 15 years. She'd be in her mid-40s when she got out. Her teaching career, over forever, her reputation destroyed, her freedom gone, and honestly, she got off easier than she deserved. Christina's lawyers filed an appeal, of course. They always do. They argued that some evidence should have been excluded, that the sentence was too harsh, that the judge was biased. In June 2019, the Wisconsin Court of Appeals rejected her appeal and upheld the conviction and sentence. The court found that the trial was conducted fairly, the evidence was properly admitted, and the sentence was appropriate given the nature of the crimes. Christina tried to appeal to the Wisconsin Supreme Court. They refused to hear the case. Her conviction was final. Her sentence would stand. As of late 2024, Christina Formella is serving her sentence at Taycheedah Correctional Institution in Fond du Lac, Wisconsin. She's been in prison for over 6 years now. According to the Wisconsin Department of Corrections inmate locator, her earliest possible release date is 2031, assuming good behavior and successful parole hearings. But here's the thing about sex offender parole. It's not guaranteed. The parole board will consider the nature of her crimes, her behavior in prison, whether she's completed sex offender treatment programs, and whether she poses a continued risk to the community. Given that she's shown minimal remorse and continues to minimize her crimes, I wouldn't count on early release. She'll likely serve close to the full 15 years. Tyler's story doesn't end with Christina's conviction. Healing from sexual abuse is a long, difficult process. According to updates from his family, provided through the Victim Advocacy Center, Tyler is still in therapy. He graduated high school. He's working on building a life for himself. But he struggles, PTSD, trust issues, anxiety. The trauma doesn't just go away because the perpetrator is behind bars. Tyler will be dealing with the effects of what Christina did to him for years, possibly for the rest of his life. But he's fighting. He's surviving. And that takes incredible strength. Christina Formella's case is, unfortunately, not unique. According to the Government Accountability Office, there were approximately 25,000 reported cases of educator sexual misconduct in the United States between 2011 and 2015 alone. And those are just the reported cases. Experts estimate the actual number is much higher. What makes Christina's case notable is that she's a female perpetrator. Studies show that female teachers who sexually abuse male students often receive lighter sentences than male teachers who abuse female students. This is a problem. Sexual abuse is sexual abuse, regardless of the genders involved. We need to take allegations of abuse by female teachers just as seriously as male teachers. Recognize that male victims face unique challenges in coming forward. Combat the harmful stereotype that teenage boys are lucky when abused by attractive female teachers. Implement better screening and monitoring systems in schools. Provide comprehensive training on recognizing grooming behaviors. So what makes someone like Christina Formella do what she did? Psychologists who have studied cases like this point to several common factors: narcissistic personality traits, belief that normal rules don't apply to them, need for admiration and control, boundary issues, inability to maintain appropriate professional relationships, thrill-seeking behavior, the risk and secrecy create excitement, arrested development, emotional maturity that hasn't progressed past adolescence, power and control needs. The relationship fulfills needs that aren't being met elsewhere. But here's the thing, none of this excuses the behavior. Plenty of people have these traits and don't sexually abuse children. Christina made choices. Every single day she chose to continue the abuse. She knew it was wrong, she did it anyway. So what can we learn from Christina Formella's case? First, trust your instincts. If something seems off about an adult's relationship with a child, say something. Second, educate kids about appropriate boundaries with adults in authority. They need to know what's okay and what's not. Third, take all allegations seriously, regardless of the genders involved. Fourth, support victims. They need to know it's not their fault and that speaking up was the right thing to do. Fifth, hold perpetrators accountable. No excuses, no minimizing, no special treatment. And for parents watching this, talk to your kids. Create an environment where they feel safe telling you if something inappropriate is happening. Monitor their digital communications, not to invade privacy but to ensure their safety. Know who your kids are spending time with and watch for warning signs: excessive attention from an adult, secretive behavior, emotional changes. Prevention is always better than intervention. When Christina is eventually released from prison, she'll be on the sex offender registry for life. This means her name, photo, and address will be publicly searchable. She'll have to register with local law enforcement wherever she lives. She'll have restrictions on where she can live and work. She'll be prohibited from being near schools, parks, or places children congregate. She'll have to regularly check in with authorities. Some people argue that lifetime registration is too harsh. I disagree. Christina's crimes weren't a one-time mistake. They were months of calculated abuse. The registry exists to protect potential future victims, and in this case, it's absolutely warranted. So that's the case of Christina Formella, a trusted special education teacher who betrayed that trust in the worst way imaginable. A predator who groomed and sexually abused a vulnerable 16-year-old student. A woman who showed no genuine remorse, even when caught. She's now 6 years into a 15-year prison sentence. Tyler is working on healing, though the scars will likely last a lifetime. This case reminds us that predators don't always look like monsters. Sometimes they look like the friendly teacher down the hall. Sometimes they're the person everyone trusts. Sometimes they're hiding in plain sight. That's why we have to stay vigilant. Why we have to listen to kids when they tell us something's wrong. Why we have to take every allegation seriously. Because somewhere right now, there's another Christina Formella. Another predator in a position of trust. And the only way to stop them is to believe victims, support survivors, and hold perpetrators accountable. If you found this deep dive valuable, please hit that subscribe button. We cover cases like this every week, shining light on crimes that deserve attention. Leave a comment below. What do you think about this case? Do you think the sentence was appropriate? How can we better protect students from predatory teachers? And if you or someone you know has experienced sexual abuse, please reach out for help. The RAINN hotline is 1-800-656-HOPE. You're not alone. Next week, we're covering another disturbing case of betrayal and manipulation. You won't want to miss it. Until then, stay safe out there. Trust but verify. This has been Women Justice Files. Thanks so much for watching this deep dive into the Christina Formella case. If you made it this far, you're a real one. Seriously. Don't forget to check out these other videos. We've covered similar cases that'll absolutely shock you. And remember, hitting that notification bell means you'll never miss an upload. We're building a community here of people who care about justice, who want to understand why these crimes happen, and who believe in supporting victims. So join us. Subscribe. Engage. See you next week with another case. Stay safe, y'all.